Good evening. Welcome to the Citizens Advisory Committee meeting. It is October 22nd. It is 6 o'clock. I'm Becky McCabe, board member.
Jillian Barker, board member.
We may have some board members who will be listening in tonight. So you may see them on your screen. And we have new people who are joining us. And people are still logging on. So thank you to all of you for participating in this important meeting, our kickoff for the Educational Facilities Long-Range Planning Group. Tonight, we've got our agenda will be mostly focused on the facilities work, but we have a few things to talk about before that. My understanding is there are no citizen comments. Is that correct, Mrs. Smith?
That's correct.
So we're going to jump right in to Dr. Pearson's superintendent update.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. I don't want to take too much time tonight because I know there's a lot to talk about as we work on the facility master plan and hear from Wold this evening. But I did want to speak just a minute to the COVID situation as Region 8, which is DuPage County and Kane County, it will enter mitigation tomorrow, which this is the first time that as a community we've stepped through this process. As you know, there have been some restrictions placed on bars and restaurants and social gatherings across the community to try to address the surge in cases that we are seeing as a community. I want to just provide some clarification and then a little bit of information. The first bit of clarification is related to mitigation. At this level of mitigation, it doesn't impact schools. Schools and school districts work under some different parameters and guidelines with the Kane County Health Department, and we are not impacted by the current mitigation. Interestingly enough, I was on a call this morning with the health department and all of the superintendents in Kane County, and in this particular case, one of the age groups that they're seeing significant surge is actually the 20 to 29-year-olds, which for this particular surge are not school age people or adults, as you can imagine, and they feel like the mitigation that they're putting in place is actually hopefully going to address some of those concerns. I also just want to say that one of the reasons that as a district and as a community we are able to stay open in this kind of situation is because of really the vigilance of our staff and students at school. They are really doing a tremendous job in an incredibly challenging situation to ensure that our social distancing requirements and our masks and all of the protocols and processes that we're putting in place. Our nurses are working really hard to do the contact tracing with the health department to try to make sure that when we become aware of a case that we are able to address it very quickly so that we can keep our students and staff safe, because our goal is to be able to stay open as long as possible. And so first, just kudos to our staff members and to our students for what they're doing to keep students safe. And if you are in any of our schools, you can see just how thoughtful they are being about trying to make sure that we're doing everything that we can do. And that's going to be really important, particularly as we come to a time when we're seeing increases of cases across our community. Keeping all of those things in place. I know everyone is exhausted and tired of wearing masks and following all of these procedures, and I get it, but it just becomes more critical, and this is the reason that we have these things in place. And so I'm hopeful, and I know that we can, but I'm hopeful that we're able to continue to follow the protocols and procedures and keep everything open in our schools. I also just want to talk about, well, how do we then know whether or not we need to close a school? And really our decision-making tree is based on actual student or staff member cases, and really whether or not they are a result of community spread or what we would call school-based spread or school-based infection. And so far in our district, all of our cases have been based or been able to be traced back to some community event or community spread, as opposed to being transmitted at school. But that's one of the things that our nurses work very closely with the health department to make a determination as to whether or not it's evident that it's possible that students or staff members are becoming ill at school because of contact with someone with COVID. And that just continues to be our process that we walk through. And it takes them, every day, following up and making sure that we are keeping track of those cases and staying in communication with the health department. So again, thank you to staff and students for doing such a great job. We are in a position right now that the health department is allowing our schools in Kane County to remain open, and we hope to be able to continue to do that. I know you may have heard on the news that there are some other counties in our area that are moving schools to remote, and it's all based on what's happening in their communities and in their schools. So we could probably talk about this all night, and it's not the topic of the evening, but I just wanted to provide that update because I know that's something that people are wondering out there as we kind of face this first time that the community is looking at the mitigation. So that's all I have to share tonight. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Pearson. Dave, could you put the document up, please? The board has landed on the following document, which I believe you had received within the packet. And this is what we are calling our charge to the CAC and to what will be known as the Educational Facility Planning Committee. And so we wanted to go over this with you so that you'll have a good sense of what the board is expecting. We thought we should read it word for word, but we decided we're not going to. We're going to assume that you have looked at it, and if you haven't, you will before you go too far into the process. So what we want to share with you is the key components of the charge so that you'll have that sense before you go into tonight's meeting. The timeline, well, first let me say that we met with the exec team of the CAC who helped us to recalibrate what we were thinking in terms of how long and who should be part of the committee. And so the board has talked about having a timeline that stays pretty focused, but has the flexibility that as you do the work, you may find that you need more time, because the board really wants a good plan. They want a well thought out recommendations that they can work from and future boards can work from. And it's important for you to know that the board we're not in the process of deciding that we're going to build a building or we're closing buildings or we have this secret thing out there. This is really a chance for us as a community to talk about what kind of educational environments we want for our children and our future's children, and set a pathway forward. So the timeline that we have established is to come together in the next few months, and the WOLD folks will be explaining all that to you, but also that we want a preliminary presentation to the board in January. Of course, it can be flexible if you need more time, but we're kind of hoping you have something to share, and that you will come back together to do more work. And as you're making these presentations to the board, we also want the community to have some feedback. And we're kind of, we'd like you to present in a format that you believe will work well to get feedback from the community. Recommendation, you may have recommendations and you want feedback. You may find that you have another format you want to use. Recognizing that the board is the one who will vote on the recommendations, we will be the ones who will be looking at it, but we really want it to have a chance, have whatever you work on to be also presented to the board or to the community.
Okay, so we need to scroll down to educational facility planning charge. I believe it's on the second page, just a little bit further, a little bit more. There you go, right there. Perfect. Okay, so as Becky started to explain, Wold had put together a foundational charge that the board really felt it was important to expand upon and put their stamp on. And we wanted to make sure that you had clear guidance and a focus as you began your work. Back to you, Mrs. McCabe. Mrs. McCabe, the first bullet is not.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I was reading. I should not have been reading. Okay, so the strategic commitments and goals are going to be the foundation that you're going to use when you unpack how does instruction and learning look like. But we also want you to look at what curricular needs there may be and the equity of programs. And let me make sure you understand when we talk about equity, we're not necessarily talking about equal. So there may be some situations where there are, this is just an example, that we should have 4 all-day kindergartens in every building. And that may not be something that is that can happen, but it will be equitable that all-day kindergarten will be offered at every building. So that equal doesn't necessarily mean equitable doesn't necessarily mean it looks the same in every building. So those are the kinds of things we want you to use as your anchor for the work that you're going to do.
We also want you to consider the needs of district level facilities and support services. And so district level facilities could mean anything from transportation to district level programming, like Northeast Academy, and as well as consider all the district assets, such as unused properties.
We want this to be financially attainable and sustainable. So we want you to dream, but we've got to be good stewards of the money. And we've got to be able to, we can't build a huge building and then not be able to pay for it, those kinds of things. So we want it to be financially attainable and something that can carry over for years. As also, we want it to be environmentally and efficiently sustainable. So as we move into the next decade, what should our buildings be headed towards environmentally and efficiently?
So we want you to also reflect the values and the priorities of the communities of St. Charles District 303. And so what does that mean really? Well, one of the reasons that you are all here is because we present a facet or more than one facet of our stakeholders. So you are representing those values and priorities.
You'll need to look at the enrollment. You'll need to look at the programs that we offer. You need to understand that there needs to be flexibility and accessibility and equity as you consider what the future may look like. So those will be some components of that work.
It'll be important that you cover any anticipated community, educational, and financial needs for the next 10 years, as well as recognize major issues beyond 10 years. And recommend optimal uses of facilities that will accommodate projected enrollment, which could include various grade level configurations, location of program, with rationale for the recommendation. So to do all that, you will analyze data to understand and quantify building capacity for early childhood, K through 12, and associated programming.
Okay, and again, you need to understand, my document's a little different. You need to understand that the future use of the facility should still meet the strategic commitments and goals that the district has.
And understand facility maintenance needs for future sustainability and address both capital costs and operational costs.
And we want you to reflect on
Mrs. McCabe,
I'm
on
sorry.
this section, and then
Okay, you keep breaking up, Jillian, I'm sorry. Okay, so we want you to anticipate future needs, and anything that we might have to study further, we'll want you to, you know, also add into your recommendation. So,
okay, so Mrs. McCabe, did you want to go over the last two bullets on that next section, Educational
Sure,
Facility
sure.
Planning Committee?
yeah. So we want you to know what our expectation is about the meetings. We have added more people to the composition of the group. We've asked teachers and educators to join. I think we had some other community people who have also are interested in joining as well. So there'll be people on the committee that were not part of our CAC. So the Educational Facility Planning Committee is going to be the CAC plus, and it will be open to the public. And the focus, when you talk about the focus groups, those will be smaller groups. It may turn out that our larger group will have to be virtual, but it will have to follow COVID public health as well. Only the members of the Facility Planning Committee can participate. And if there were any decisions or votes that had to be made in order to get to your recommendation for the board, only the members would be the ones involved. We're trying to be as transparent as possible. The board would like to be able to hear your discussions when the large group meets. And so we are hoping to be able to be non-participants when the Educational Facility Planning Committee comes together. They will not be board committee meetings. They will be your meeting, but we will be sitting in and just listening. We will not participate. And it's not clear that all board members will join as well. The plan is to stream so that people can hear the larger committee meetings and get and have a sense of what we're planning to do. Or what you're talking about, I guess is better.
Okay, so the whole point to all of this is that we will have a comprehensive long-range educational facilities master plan to accommodate enrollment, instruction, programs, and supports over the next 10 years. And of course, it remains financially sustainable.
So I'm going to say that in order to save time, if you have questions, put it in the chat room. So that way then Mrs. Barker and I can look at them and we can try to answer your questions. And then otherwise, we'll turn it over to Dan, who will take you through the rest of the meeting.
Thank you, Ms. McCabe. Thanks, Ms. Barker, as well. You took a chunk of my anxiety away when you went through the whole charge statement. I was thinking I was going to be the spokesperson for that, so thank you for that. My name is Dan Critta. It's great to see everybody tonight, and thank you for your interest and your commitment to D303 to go through this long-range planning process. We're excited. I'm actually a member of the community, and we see a pretty regimented group of meetings coming up here, and I'll walk through that on the schedule with you. But I do want to introduce a couple of my peers that are going to be along for some of our meetings. Allison Andrews, who's been also very involved with this process, is on vacation, so she's not able to join us tonight, but you'll see her in the focus group meetings and beyond. So with me tonight is Adam Moore and Jonathan Kuzanowski, and they're just kind of keeping me in between the rails tonight. So they're taking notes and minutes, and so we make sure we cover all the comments that are coming up. And again, use the chat room. That works for us too. We'll slow down on occasion and check that to make sure we're not going through something that doesn't make sense to everybody. And I'll ask our board representatives, is it make sense to go through and everybody introduce themselves and just how they're affiliated with the district?
That would be great, but I have no idea how you do that logically.
Yeah, everyone's screen looks different. You are correct. Maybe I think a Google Doc has been set up for all the members. If there's a spot for that in that Google Doc, that you could just let us know what your affiliation, whether it's parent, teacher, community member, or maybe it's multiple threads to the community, to the district. Let us know what those connections are, because that helps us understand where the voices are in this group. And we'd also like to know how long you've been affiliated with the district, whether you've lived in the district for a certain amount of years or taught in the district for a certain amount of years. It's good to know what that cumulative experience is. And it's actually one of our slides here, but I'll just kind of give you a precursor to that, something that we would like to understand, because it's a broad group. It's great to have this many perspectives feeding into this process. And we just, the more we get to know you, the better off we feel like where those comments are coming from. If they can queue up the presentation. Thank you. So we can probably move through the first few slides pretty well because it's a recap. Well, actually, if you go to the agenda, I'll just give you an overview of what we're going to cover tonight. It's one page back. Second, there we go. So we'll save the welcome introductions. I will tell you that I'm with Wold Architects Engineers. I am a facility planner as well as an architect with the firm. Adam Moore and Jonathan, who are with us tonight, are architects and part of our project team, looking at this assessment as well as the long-range planning effort. We will reserve the introductions because it will be kind of confusing, so we'll hold off on that. But the topics we want to hit tonight, we already heard in very great detail the planning charge, the committee charge, what the board is actually looking from this group to present to them at not just an interim presentation, in which we're targeting for January, but also to come up with a 10-year educational facility master plan for the district. And that's looking at a March deliverable date. We also we'll talk a little about the district strategic plan, just cover some of the strategic commitments that the district already has in place. I'll go through some facilities information because I'm sure that like me, being a member of the community, I didn't know every facility that the D303 had their hands on, nor the parcels that are owned by the district. So I'd like to go through that briefly and just get everybody up to speed so you understand how many buildings and properties the district is in charge of. And then also the capacity versus the enrollment. We'll talk a little bit about how many students can fit in the buildings, but also what is the projection for student population as we move forward. And then educational alignment will be a brief overview and a little bit of what we've learned so far in talking to the buildings. But that is something as a focus group and a learning focus group, learning spaces focus group, we'll dive much deeper into. And then we'll talk a little bit about that focus group structure and what that looks like moving forward after tonight's kickoff meeting. You can go a couple slides in. Yeah. Now, Ms. McCabe and Ms. Barker covered these topics pretty thoroughly, so we won't rehash them. You can move on to the, yeah. Okay, so we were afraid there was something corrupted the schedule in the version that we were trying to send up via PowerPoint. If you would allow us to share the screen, we could pull up a version that's.
You should have the ability.
There we go. Thanks, Adam. So the overall planning schedule, I just want to kind of give you the 10,000 foot level view of this. Since last December, January, we've been really in a fact-finding mode. And that's been touring buildings, talking to the administrators in the buildings, talking to their building leadership teams, and also analyzing the buildings from a physical standpoint. What physical condition issues exist in each of the facilities? All that fact finding has led us to today. So we have a lot of documentation information. Some we'll be sharing with you tonight. It's kind of a snapshot in time, but how are the buildings being used? What kind of capacity do they have? What kind of issues or challenges might they be facing from not just a programmatic standpoint, but also from a physical condition standpoint? So that information is something we'll start to distribute through our focus groups. Depending on which focus group you're in, you may see different portions of that fact finding. And then tonight, we're kicking off what we would call the vision section of this effort. And that's really to understand how is the district going to move forward, to give you the facts that we've learned and share that with you as we go forward through the focus groups. And then coming together again before the end of December to, as a full committee, to talk about what kind of findings did each focus group discover, and then what kind of needs seem to be the priorities that that focus group has found to be something to push forward. From that standpoint, we would present that to the board in January, let them know what those findings and needs are, and then with a potential date of a community outreach towards the end of January. But then our second phase of this effort, what we're calling more of an options development or the planning stage, that would start in the end of January and take us right through March. That's going to be about 4 meetings is what we're looking at right now. And that will be focused on taking all those needs from the different focus areas and saying, what's the best way to solve that? How do we move forward and come up with a 10-year plan that really touches all those priorities that this group has identified? So bringing that to a conclusion with a deliverable to the board in March, and then giving them some time to consider or play back things that they would like this group to go back and look at a little differently. It's certainly that is a give and take process. But at that point of delivering that recommendation to the board, it may be more than one scenario. It may be broken into a couple different paths that the board can consider. So we don't have to have the one size fits all solution. We want to make sure that we have something that the board can understand and ask questions and maybe change direction a little bit. So if you go to the next slide, Adam. This is just kind of zooming in on that. So November, December, the focus groups. January, we'll be presenting the findings and the needs to the board. That would be the checkpoint that Ms. McCabe talked about. And then January, March, we'll be developing those options or solutions. How do we solve these challenges? And then presenting to the board in March. Does anyone have any questions so far about the overall schedule? Nobody ran away yet, so that's good. All right, we'll move on. Should we just use this, Carol, is that okay if we just keep paging through the version that we have? I think
Absolutely.
it'll be the same from here on out. Okay,
It's fine.
perfect. The educational, so the process, I want to just give you more of a graphic that shows how this group comes together and separates into focus groups. Next slide, please. From an overall standpoint, I talked about that fact finding. We've really got that kind of solved now. That information is available. Now we're looking at the 3 focus groups that you see in the 3 different colors, the green and the light blue and the dark blue. One being learning spaces, one being community space, and the third being physical conditions. Those 3 focus groups will meet after this meeting at least 3 times. That's what we're targeting right now, is 3 meetings, and then coming back together again as a full group, as a facility planning committee. One thing that I wanted to note, the top half of this chart is important because we really want to agree on what the needs are. We want to have some consensus on what are we going to solve as a committee moving forward, and because it's going to drive the recommendation. If we don't have agreement on those needs, it'll be very difficult to come up with one or several solutions that really meet a finite group of needs. So we'll work hard to get that consensus with the committee, and it's really important. It helps us create some solutions that really have some, I guess, some meat, some concrete. You know what I mean. The second half of this is the options development. Once we have those needs in place, we can develop options that we'll play back and say what is the pros and the cons of these options before it gets to a board setting where you would make a final recommendation. Next slide. On the top half of that, with showing the focus groups, the subtopics for those focus groups are what you see there, and I think that was in the information that was sent out to you. I won't spend a lot of time on that, but as we move forward, the meetings 2 through 4 will be individual separated focus groups, and we're planning on doing those as live meetings. Those will be done all at Thompson, and we'll show you the schedule towards the end of this meeting, just so you understand the commitment and the times for those upcoming meetings. Next slide, Adam. And we're looking at 4 meetings that might stretch to 5 as we look at solution discussion and how we move forward with a final option going towards a recommendation to the board. And that will happen starting in January. Next slide. So I wanted to cover the strategic commitments and goals of the district. I know these are available on the website, and I'm sure it's a culture of the district, so they're not completely unknown. Next slide, please. To the left side of the slide, you see is the board commitments, and that's really the framework for a lot of the things we'll be talking about and doing. We want to make sure that we're not straying away from the priorities of the district. To the right side are the strategic commitments the district has generated from those board commitments. And those are a little more tangible components to the long-range outlook for the school district. So that really becomes our guiding principles. As we're talking about the needs and the solutions, they should always be in the backdrop of, are we still aligned with the commitments that the district has already formulated? Next. And just covering those a little bit, because there's subtopics within that. We will provide our students with innovative learning experiences that prepare them for post-secondary careers and higher education. But within those is a subset of personalization of learning, authentic learning experiences, responsive teaching, and competency-based strategies. that's a lot of the things that the learning space focus group will be talking about, is how do these apply and solve some of the challenges in the buildings. And the buildings all have a different degree of meeting these commitments, depending on age or size of space or what age level that it's serving. Then the next one is geared towards your staff. We are committed to hiring and retaining high quality staff members. So the topics are very similar. The subtopics of that, the personalized learning, authentic learning, because it's just the other side of that coin, or that serving the students in the same mindset. Again, that'll be part of mostly the learning space dialogues. We are responsible stewards of the resources in District 303 designated by and for our community. These are just paraphrases out of some of the language under that. Fiscally responsible, having a balanced budget, making sure they're still providing high quality resources, and then valuing the contributions of the stakeholders that you represent as a planning committee. Next. And the fourth strategic commitment is outreach and community engagement opportunities. Keep District 303 residents informed about our mission, vision, programs, services, and use of resources. And some of the threads that allow that to happen. Now, from a standpoint of where does this fit in some of our focus group dialogue, mostly be talked about at the community space focus group. But again, that could also spill into dialogues that all three focus groups are having. Next slide. Questions so far? Anybody have questions that we should take a pause on? I'm not keeping track of the chat room. If there's anything in there we should cover before we move on.
Dan, there were some questions by Zach about the timeline and whether the board had already made some decisions. And so I answered a couple of those. And then it was recommended that we wait and take a break and answer any questions that might come.
Yeah, I figured that it might be a good idea to maybe read the questions, and so that people out there can hear them if they have the same or similar question. So I don't know if how we want to handle this, but
I can read through the questions and
okay. And then we can
answer what we know and
okay.
defer what we don't get.
I just wonder if we should wait till the end. Some of these questions may be answered as we go along. So I just wonder, I'm very conscious that we have a very tight time scale, and maybe we can take questions at the end if that's okay.
If that works for everybody, that's fine.
That works for me. That's
okay.
What I kind of was thinking.
Okay. Let's get into facilities information. Again, I just wanted to talk about, so everybody understands how many buildings the district has, the properties, and where they're located within the boundaries of the D303. Currently, there's 12 elementary or early childhood buildings in the district. Fox Ridge School being the early childhood center, and then Davis Primary and Richmond Intermediate being basically partner buildings, one serving the primary age, one serving the intermediate age. And then the rest of the buildings are pre-K through 5 or K through 5. The two middle schools, Thompson and Redling, and then the two high schools. And then if you can go back 1 second. The buildings that are supporting DO33 and some have some programs in them. The administration building obviously is for specific purposes. Haynes Center, I know it's called Haynes Center or Haynes Building. I think that's been kind of in the works. Haynes currently has a transitional program. It also has the St. Charles Public Library, and looking to house the Northeast Academy as well in that space, as among some other features in the building. That that building, if you haven't been aware, that there is a demolition of a portion of that building and a remodeling to accommodate some of those programs over the last, just the previous year. On Maids Johnstone, also having more of a center program that draws from other school districts. And then the transportation buildings on Peck Road, which is some of the operations and facilities as well as transportation functions are housed there. The next is just a graphic map of where those locations are. And most of you probably know this, it's common knowledge, but it's good to see that how far the spread of the boundaries actually take the school district and where those buildings are anchored based on the populations of the school district. The next slide is looking at 5 parcels of land that the district actually owns. You'll see 1 to the north, and then 2 and 3 further to the west. 5 is just behind Bell Graham, and 4 is off of Silver Glen and Randall. And then I've got, if you go to the next slide, each property gives you a little more sense of how much there actually is. So property 1 you saw in the north, kind of central part of the boundaries, is just under 7 acres. You can go to the next one. Property 2, which is off of Silver Glen, is actually baseball diamonds. And then the area to the green is also part of that parcel that's collectively 11.28 acres. The third one is further to the west. It's actually 3 parcels, the blue, the green highlighted area. And then there's a small part to the left of that, just in the kind of the crux of those 2 meeting. Collectively, those 3 parcels are just over 12 acres. And then parcel 4 is a large portion off of Silver Glen behind the senior living development. And then this is the just over 2 acres, but that's right behind Bell Graham, and it's contiguous with the Bell Graham property. So just a reminder where those 5 locations are. They're generally to the central to the west side of the school district. Next slide. So another part of our charge when we started the fact-finding part of this process was to look at all the conditions of every school building. That's from a standpoint of site, envelope, the interiors, the systems, mechanical and electrical systems, to give a very comprehensive look at how these buildings are, what kind of deferred maintenance or capital improvements might be on the horizon. We're working with the operations team to do some final prioritizing of that, but that'll be information that's available to the physical condition team or focus group. And we'll be providing you what that capital plan looks like as we move forward, so you understand what's on that list and what's already been garnered to be addressed in the next 3, 4, 5 years. This is intended to be a 10-year outlook of those necessary improvements. This is one snapshot of that area, of that format. Next one. So we want to talk a little about capacity versus enrollment, and I'll explain how we come up with a capacity for a school, and also where the enrollment projections have been tracking, and what's the next couple of years look like as far as the outlook. Just from a really high level, the district-wide, you'll see the orange graph or orange bar in the middle of the graph. That's where the student population has been trending. So the last couple of years, it's declined slightly, and it seems like it's on a fairly similar decline path. Now that doesn't apply at every single school. That's more of a district-wide path of enrollment. And certainly the crystal ball for the next couple of years, and this year for that matter, it was a unique year, still is, but the next couple of years that usually have a 2 to 5 year outlook that you can feel pretty comfortable understanding when enrollment's going. And the district is fine tuning some of those projections But as of the latest version, this is where we see that enrollment population going. And you can see in comparison to the green bar, that would be the capacity of all schools. And again, that's under the assumption that every class is at its maximum capacity at each point of the day. So it's your max of the way you're utilizing the buildings today. So you'll see at the bottom notation there, the per grade student average decreases from today through 23-24. The elementary school is just ticking down 3 students, the best we can tell from the projections. So it's very stable. The middle schools are also quite stable, the slight decline, and then probably a little more noticeable at the high school level. But if you look at the class sizes, and we'll talk about this in a minute, the class size at the elementary level are lower than the middle school and high school. So those will be eventually traveling through the middle school and high school programs. So there should be a continued decline unless something that's unpredicted changes that. Next slide, please. Now, I don't expect you to read this. This will be information that'll be available to you. I do want to just hit the highlights, but what we've done is looked at last year's enrollment, this year's unofficial enrollment. It was a snapshot in time as we were putting this presentation together for the board. That's the yellow column. We looked at the capacity of every school, as well as the capacity at every elementary school with the metric of 25 students per classroom. Right now, 27 is the max. And then the projected enrollments under a previous scenario and what they were using to plan for 2019 and 2020. And then also the 3 years moving forward. What does that projection look like? So just in a recap, the elementary school's enrollment is showing stability. And we saw that in the previous chart. Current capacity is 58-57. Right now, the elementary schools, it would not exceed the current enrollment, or would not be. There's about 1,000 student gap between the current enrollment this year and what the capacity of the elementaries are. Now, a highlight of this, or an exception, is projections at Davis, Lincoln, and Munhall could challenge those capacities in 3 years from now. So those buildings are seeing slight increases each year and getting very close to what we would call the capacity based on the way those schools are being utilized right now. Fearson Creek is the only school that, if you were to look at a 25 student max for those elementary classrooms, that building would be just about right at its capacity. That's the only school that, looking at it today, is pressing that barrier. And again, that's if at a 25 student per class target. The middle school projections are looking stable, but the capacity is 3,044. The current enrollment is 2,681, give or take a few students based on what's happened in the last month. And the high school enrollments projection are slightly declining. The current capacity in those facilities is 4,986, and the current enrollment is around 4,230. So there's a little bit of gap between both those high school capacities and the current enrollment. And I want to explain how we come up with that capacity, because it's different at a middle school, or different at an elementary school than it is at middle school and high school. So this is a model, and we've done this for every school, is looking at what classes are used as classes. Basically, at the elementary level, a homeroom or a first grade classroom would be a teaching station. So we can easily understand how teaching stations create a capacity. Anything that's not an exploratory class or a special needs environment, those would not count as a teaching station, as a homeroom teaching station. So we wouldn't count kids in those on a full-time basis. That's how we understand the elementary capacities. At the middle school and the high school, to understand utilization and capacity there, we look at how every classroom is being used on a daily basis. And those little pie charts that you can kind of see in the plan dictate that classroom is being used 7 out of 8 periods or 6 out of 8 periods or 5 out of 8 periods. It gives us a gauge of what is the utilization of the facility. Because they have a rotational schedule and they're moving through that school, they aren't in any given class at the same time, more like an elementary school. So how we understand that is we get a teaching station count, very similar to the way we do in an elementary, but then we apply a utilization factor. So the utilization factor this is at the high school, North High School. This is a section of that building. At the high school, it's 90%. They're being very effective in how they're using space. 90% is a great target to be at for utilization. Normally in a school of middle or up through high school, we'd see usually in the 75% to 90 would be a good range. So they're at the top of that range. But based on how they're using it, that the student capacity is 2,413 at North High School. We can go to the next one, Adam. One other metric that we check, and it's to tell a bigger story, but is what's the instructional capacity of a space. So you may have heard or seen that some of the classrooms in the district at the elementary level especially are smaller than maybe a neighboring class in the same building or a class size of other buildings. And as we talked to principals and teachers, when we went through the process of, I should mention how we came up with the capacity, was walking those schools with the principals and interviewing them on what's working in the building, where are some of your space challenges, what would be nice to be looking at if you were to support programs that you're struggling with right now or that you see coming down the line. Empower would be one of those programs that has been launched in the district. As we look at the instructional capacity, that's based on best practice. So if a classroom is 750 square feet and you're putting 27 students, the learning experience in that classroom might be different than those same 27 students in a 900 square foot classroom. So what instructional capacity does is it looks at how many students can fit in any given school based on the space allocated in a certain classroom. And we've tallied it up. So the column second to the right is that instructional capacity compared to the overall capacity of the building. And we look at the differential. So the far right column is the differential between those two numbers. And what it tells us is if the differential is small, there's probably not great space challenges within the classroom environments or learning environments. If that differential starts to creep up to 10 to 20%, then it would start to highlight that it would be an objective way of checking that the information or that what we witnessed as we walked through those schools is holding true, because it's saying that if you put in 23 students or 21 students or 19 students, because that would be a best practice guideline for a smaller space, then you would have a differential that's saying that less students should be in that environment. So this is another metric that we assess as we go through the schools and talk to principals and educators. I'm not sure, it looks like the chat room has been a little quieter since our last check. Is there any questions people have just to want to, something that didn't make sense in that last series of information? Okay, we'll keep moving. I will say also that the educational alignment evaluation is a document that was handed off to the board several weeks ago. That'll be available to this group as well. And the more deeper dive into some of those enrollment projections and comparisons to capacity, building by building, will be in that document. So it'll be easy to see how some of those numbers were derived and compare those from a school by school basis. So when we look at alignment, from a bigger picture standpoint, what we're trying to understand is not just the way that the district has articulated that in the strategic commitments, but you have first and second graders and kindergartners that are going to be coming out of the school system in 2031, 2032, 2033. And we don't know what that world is going to look like. So one of the things that the Learning Spaces Focus Group will spend time thinking about is what do we need to do in the buildings today to help support what we don't know. The jobs that they'll be in may not exist right now. So that'll be a learning focus group. Really part of our dialogue will be talking about not just what the buildings expressed as being some of the space challenges, but also from a bigger picture standpoint, how do we accommodate learning as we move forward to the next generation in the buildings that currently exist. Next slide. What we know, I won't spend a lot of time on this, but the revolutions that have taken place over time get shorter and shorter. And so the third industrial revolution is considered the personal computing revolution. We're currently in the fourth industrial revolution of artificial intelligence. And we know that you can see just by the color coding there that those timelines squeeze. So in 2031, we'll be entering very much likely a fifth revolution of industrial revolution. Nobody really knows what that's going to be. So to predict that, how do we serve and support learning when we're not sure what those needs are going to be? What we did learn when we talked to not just the principals at every school, but also we're invited back to talk to their building leadership teams. And it was more to kind of expand on what the principals thought were some of the challenges in each building. We created just a common alignment needs. These are the things that we heard repeatedly for each school. Every school had very much more granular issues or items as well. And that will be in the document you'll see. But this is a little more broader look at where some of those common territory landed. At the elementary schools, we heard repeatedly about classroom equity. And sometimes that was size, but other times it was just the vintage of storage and amenities and the quality of those in that classroom environment and how they compared to other classes in the building or district. Furniture upgrades at classrooms, looking towards more collaborative or diverse furnishings, something a little moving away from more of that lecture-based or non-configurable environment. Collaborative spaces for students and staff came out loud and clear. Having more support space and storage improvements. Some buildings are a little further behind in storage than others. And then having space for those dedicated specials, whether it's in power or band or orchestra, to have a space that really accommodates what happens in that classroom or that teaching environment. And then different schools had different levels of this, but some of the parking and site flow improvements that we talked about it from just movement and safety and how kids and vehicles move around the site. At the middle schools, the common ground was the Learning Resource Center improvements. That was at both schools. But then at Redling, because Thompson obviously received massive improvements, Redling, some issues with the parking and drive areas, additional science labs, improving the restrooms, and that was really catering to one of the special needs programs. Convert the lounge at the media center. They also voiced classroom furniture improvements, and then some phy-ed storage, and again, some other site issues with widening sidewalks. We also know the track is another concern at that building that's come up since this list has been generated. So those are pretty identifiable issues. They're not too philosophical. They're pretty hands-on. At the high schools, East High School was a sports complex updates. That was more facelifts type things or physical improvements, culinary arts improvements, music suite improvements, outdoor concessions and restrooms, furniture upgrades, and then classroom equity. And East High School has some very small classrooms, those that haven't been there, in comparison to some very adequate classroom sizes. There are some small ones that are accommodating more or less the same amount of kids. At North High School, they were looking for a small group collaboration space, physical education, athletic expansion, locker room improvements, science lab improvements, classroom furniture again there, and LRC improvements to better use the space they have. Had some hallway congestion issues at that building too, one specific area that comes to mind. and then some parking site improvements. So these were the more tangible things that were voiced by those schools. And this is, again, something that we'll talk about. This really populates different focus groups depending on whether it's space for the community, physical issues, or learning environments. So having that knowledge of what was voiced at each school is important as we talk and move into the focus groups. What we did for each building then was just kind of do a test of how could you accommodate some of the things that were voiced, the higher priority issues. And we did ask each school. It was difficult and not so difficult to prioritize what was the biggest challenges at each building. This is just Munhall as an example. Their priority needs are listed on the right-hand side. And then we looked at what would you do or how could you address that through different renovations, possible expansion, or heavy renovation, really remodeling spaces to try to address some of those items. So those, how we're addressing those are tagged in with title bullets to kind of show you this is the areas that would be improved based on touching these different spaces. Again, it wasn't driven by a lot of input. It was driven by a test. How would you be able to accommodate these if this was the full priority list? Can we solve it? And that'll be something that we'll generate or use as a tool or a kind of a springboard. We start talking about option development. We'll reach back to this and see if maybe some of those things we solved in our first blush. So focus groups, as we move forward, and our next set of meetings will be broken into 3 groups. You can switch it to the next one. The Learning Spaces focus group, and I believe this information was sent out to you, but really the areas that we're going to be talking about are technology and education, educational programming goals, building equity, modernization, and branding, grade configuration from a more of a philosophical standpoint, and then alignment with the strategic vision, which in my opinion is probably the most influential guiding principle, is making sure that we're not straying from what's important and what's been voiced by the leadership in the district. So that'll be our focus as we move into the next set of meetings. From a community spaces focus group, athletics and performance spaces, community and partnerships, and activities in community. And what are the expectations of the community on the buildings of D303, as well as how do they serve from internally to the different programs, athletics and performing arts, those type of things. What could be improve on that front as far as the community's use and involvement? And last is physical conditions focus group. That'll be more focused on site design and what kind of challenges are physically on each site. The building conditions, which will be really laid out in a capital plan that'll be fairly well defined, but room for discussion. And then capacity, enrollment, and grade configuration. Not from a philosophical standpoint, but more from a building fit standpoint. And then efficient operations. Are there places or goals that should be on the radar for efficiency of buildings, sustainability objectives, initiatives? Some of those things will be talked about at that building condition or physical condition focus group. And each group then will develop a needs statement to take and compare with the other focus groups. That'll be our meeting before the holiday break, is to come back together as a full group. We'll talk about that as the schedule popped up here. So as the focus groups moving forward, we're looking at November 4th and 5th as a pair of nights that the first focus group would happen. And then the 18th and 19th as the second meeting for the focus groups, called meeting 3 on here. The 4th meeting would be on December 2nd and 3rd. And then we would get back together on the 15th of December for those focus groups to kind of voice what their findings were, talk as a full team. And then in the process for that would be to bring those needs and findings together to present to the board in January. So there's a lot to do, but I don't know if everybody signed up. Carol, I wasn't sure if that form went out for them to kind of pick a committee or.
No, I wanted you to be able to explain the committees to them a little bit. And then now based on your desire to have some more information about what their role is in the district and how many years they've been here. So I will be sending that form out tomorrow.
Okay, sounds good.
We're going to be asking you to rank order your choices. We'll try to give you your first choice, but we do want to make sure that the committees are representative. So we'll assign you your committees very soon.
Can you go back a slide so we can see those one more time? It went too fast.
Yeah, we can leave that up. The calendar to the right is just showing the dates. And moving beyond January, we have some dates that and those are tentative. Everything from January out to March, we can talk as a large group, because the meetings we'll have starting in January after we present to the board will be focused on as a full group. We will come back out of focus groups and talk about gaining consensus on what challenges are we going to prioritize to try to solve in a master plan, and do that over a 3-4 meeting stretch, with March as the target for handing that off to the board or recommending that to the board.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Does anyone have any immediate questions? We can go back to the chat. That's basically the overview of what we've learned. You'll get more data in the booklet we're putting together, and we just wanted to make sure we knew how many people wanted to have a hard copy of the information that we've kind of pulled examples out of tonight. But also, as we get into the focus groups, there'll be additional information that we'll be adding on. For instance, in the community space focus group, we know that there'll be questions about how are gymnasiums and community space being used now? What's the balance of that building by building? We'll bring that information to the table so that can be part of our discussion. What kind of partnerships exist with different organizations outside the school district, just so that everybody has a clear picture of what's happening currently. Similarly with the learning space group and the physical conditions group, there'll be more information that will dovetail, and you'll send us back after a meeting and say, we would like to know more about this. We will also be harvesting more information as you ask questions about things that maybe haven't been on our radar yet. So I'll go back to the chat room and we can start looking at what kind of questions are out there. Let's see.
Can you talk about when you did the enrollment projections, or when you walked through the buildings? Because we have a question about whether or not we feel that the impact of COVID will have some migration to the suburbs and perhaps change those projections in the future.
That is a great question, and it's something that Dave Shazar at the district, who is kind of manages some of those enrollment populations, we've talked about that and what is the impact, and I just don't think anybody really knows for sure if there's going to be an influx or an outflux of students because of what's happened with the COVID reaction or pandemic. I don't have a crystal ball to tell you what that will look like, but I think, and I know in his talking to the demographer that has done some of the base foundation work for projections, they're much less apt to take risk with those projections right now. There's just a lot of uncertainty. So I don't know if we can answer that question in any more detail at this point in time.
other questions about the new home developments for future enrollment projections. And I know that that's something that the district does look at. But I don't know, Dan, if you looked at it for purposes of this study or not.
We haven't. That's something we can add to the conversations we move into the focus groups. If there was full build out of some of the spaces that were charted for development, what would that bring as far as a student population? There's metrics we can apply of how many students per household if it was fully built out. So we can add that to the list. I think the district has done a really good job of tracking when those developments might start to spark back up again or gain interest. So that would be that. There's usually a period of time that you can react to those things becoming real again, because a lot of them kind of stopped in motion a few years ago.
Mm-hmm.
But we can bring that information and see how it might affect the projections.
Right. This seems like a lot of work and a very aggressive kind of timeline. Can you talk a little bit about how you've managed this type of timeline in other districts and whether or not we feel that we will be able to make some meaningful recommendations to the board in January?
Yeah, it's, well, the COVID environment here has compressed what the anticipated schedule for this. When we charted this out over almost a year ago, it was pre-COVID. So we're compressing a little bit of what we were hoping to have from this timeline, but I think it's really up to the district. What if there's a targeted recommendation standpoint from the boards or Dr. Pearson's perspective, we'll meet it. I don't think we might have to add a meeting or two in this process, but I think the board is also, in part of their charge statement, iterated this. They're welcome to a schedule change if we find that the pace and the information they're not going hand in hand. If there's more information needed as we start marching into this process, we may have to add meetings and add some time. And I think the board's been, from what the discussion that was previously had, would welcome that if that's the case. But it's a little more aggressive than the normal schedule. I won't lie. I think if the other part of this too that we haven't talked about is the focus groups want to tour certain aspects of the buildings. We would have to add some dates to be able to go to buildings and do it under the health protocols to look at specific things, because sometimes everybody doesn't have the same view of what the physical environments are at a given building, depending on what focus group you enter.
So do you do any work with any organizations that may be looking at what post-COVID looks like as far as schools go and planning for the fact that education may not look the same as it did a year ago?
Yes, we currently, from our perspective as a educationally focused firm, we're doing that internally, but we're also checking that against what's happening in the industry, what's happening in education. Some of those predictions are, again, they're uncertain, but we know, and our firm is actually putting together a presentation to talk about that in January that we'd be glad to share with the team here, is just what kind of impacts is COVID going to have on not just learning environments, but also systems and buildings. What kind of opportunities might there be from being more preventative about the spread of viruses within a facility. So there's different aspects to that. Some of it is a little untested at this point, but we'll be reporting that as we learn it. I think some of our best sounding boards are actually our clients. Working with districts like yourselves, we learn a lot about what you're trying and not working as well. It's just kind of all feeding into what are the common ground of things that seem like they're working well, and how do you predict what's going to happen next?
there
that was a
some,
kind of a roundabout answer, but there's a lot of uncertainty wrapped around what the COVID impacts will be.
are there some things that, that the participants should do in preparation for their first focus group? Is there, I know that we're going to be providing information to them. Dan has been very generous in getting printed copies of this presentation and a lot of the work that they did, so that you all can pick it up at my office starting on Monday. And so I'm wondering if there's homework that they have, or if there's some things that they can be doing in preparation.
Well, I think if you have an interest or a passion towards a certain focus group, and there's usually one or two focus groups get a little more stacked than the others, and that's okay. We just want representation and voices that can be a conduit back to the community in any given focus group, and kind of bring what you're thinking might be happening outside of your world and into our discussions. And I think from a standpoint of homework, it's picking a focus group. And then if your focus group is physical conditions, I think we might want to set up some tours, not before the first meeting, but to go and look at some things that might not be just, as we talk about HVAC issues and things like that, it might be good to go see what some of those physical challenges are in a building. So at least to get a sampling of it. But other than that, I don't think there's a lot of homework. We'll be doing a lot of homework between now and then, but I think as long as you're thinking about your focus group and what kind of questions you want to ask, because what typically happens is you'll ask us questions, and then in that 2-week span between meetings, we'll be going back, working with the district to bring more collected data to you to answer the questions you do have.
Any other questions?
I have a question. And you touched on this just a little bit, if somebody wants to see a building, how should they proceed, especially with the situation we're in with COVID?
Yeah, I think I would work with the operations team at the district and find out what protocols need to be in place. It would likely be off hours or off school hours, at least, to limit any kind of overlap with students and staff. But I would, I guess I'd defer to have that conversation with them, and what the ability of doing that, but also what kind of protocols should we put in place? Because if it's a large enough group, we would want to break into subgroups and maybe do this and start in different parts of the building, or different schools for that matter.
So if people are interested, contact Carol. Would that make the most sense? And then Carol, you can.
Well, if we can get a list of folks that are interested in seeing some of the buildings, I think also if there's specific things that individuals want to see, that might give us a little better structure of how we set up a tour.
And that
But
might
yes,
be based
I
on
think
what
if you can get
what the focus group is.
Yeah.
But we can certainly set those up.
There's a lot of people that would benefit from seeing some or most of the buildings. I mean, there is some prototypical buildings that you repeat kind of the same spaces and layouts and things like that, but we could at least try to get a sample tour of seeing different things at different buildings that might help people wrap their head around some of the challenges.
Sure, that might not be a bad idea. We just have to make sure that we build in some time to take temperatures and make sure that we're practicing all of our social distancing, and everyone needs to wear masks, and we'll be doing it after hours, so there won't be any students in the building, but we can talk about those protocols once we set it up. Are there specific buildings, Dan, that just from your, that you think that would be interesting to see, or that may be buildings that you think there might be a lot of conversation around?
Yeah, I think some of the things we've heard from an accessibility standpoint probably stand out. There's 3 schools that have some level change challenges as far as mid-level spaces and not without elevators and that kind of thing. There's also some of the older portions of the parts of the schools are where some of the smaller classrooms may exist. I think would be good to see as a comparison, because that, from an equity standpoint, I think would be good to understand what the gap is between a 1950s, 60s classroom to a 2001 classroom. So I think that we could set up something that started to target those spaces. And then if people have other things they really want to see, whether it's, I don't know how broad our group's knowledge is of all the facilities. So if you have things you want to see, that might be something else to reach out through this Google Doc and share, so we can get a better gauge on how broad a tour that should be, whether it's athletic spaces or performance spaces, or seeing the sites, which you would want to do before dark. So there's some challenges there too, as far as timing.
Well, and we will, I will get the Google Sheet out to everyone tomorrow. So you have the list now of the meetings, so that you can see if that fits into your schedule. You have a description of the focus groups, and so that will also help you to make a decision. So if you can complete that Google Sheet and get it back to me early next week, then we can start scheduling those, the meetings and making sure that you get the information that you need.
Any other questions that popped up or that people have on their mind?
On that Google Doc also I'm going to add the questions about how much experience you have and what your affiliation is with the district. So that will all be the same with the same Google Doc.
Are we in good shape then?
Yeah.
I was gonna wait just a second to see if anyone else was typing something. Sometimes there's that delay.
Do we want to go back to the screen of the participants?
Yeah, but if everybody sees the dates on here, and that can be provided as well. I think.
Well, it is, and that's in that I emailed this sheet to everyone in their packet. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
All right.
Any questions? Anything else? Thank you for your participation tonight, and we look forward to continuing this process. We'll be in a little more smaller groups to some degree moving forward, and live meetings, and we'll do that with COVID restrictions in mind. But it'll be a little easier also to have some more lively dialogue and talk about issues, and we'll kind of, the kickoff meetings of focus groups, I think we'll share more data on your topic, and then you can ask us questions and send us back to find more information. But we'll also get a pulse of who wants to go see some buildings. We'll generate a list and some ideas ahead of time, but maybe not everybody wants to or needs to go on a tour, but we'll try to do that as a larger group broken into smaller compartmented groups. Because I think if we're at 35, 40 people, we'll have to spread out, but not something that's impossible.
Right. I'm wondering, Dr. Pearson, if you want to talk a little bit about what kind of district support the group will have during the focus groups and the process.
Yeah, so we'll make district staff available to the focus groups if there are topics that you want to know more about, or a vision that we have for something, or things that as a board or as a district we've talked about or thought about, or from a strategic standpoint are interested in having you explore maybe at a deeper level. So there will be someone like with the educational spaces group or the educational group, there will be some folks from learning and teaching that may come and go from your team. We have some folks from the operations team that are going to, of course, help with the group that's talking about physical spaces, because sometimes there's historical knowledge and perspective there that might be needed as part of your conversation. So we'll have some people that will help provide you with any information that you need or resources from the district perspective.
Great. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Mr. Krita. At this time, I'd like to adjourn our CAC meeting. It is